This is a meeting of the Seasonal Law Enforcement Officers Committee, and I'd like to call it to order since it's 10 o'clock. The next item on the agenda is public comment. I don't believe we received any public comment. So the next agenda item is the evaluation and discussion on feasibility of hiring seasonal law enforcement officers. At the last meeting, which was held in July, we had left a couple of items for follow-up that we would be able to discuss today. So those items were to determine the start and end dates for the Rangers. The town manager was going to try to reach out to other town managers to see what type of program they had. Chief Dixon was going to see if there were any similar situated municipality whose police chiefs would discuss their handling of the beach strand with us. And the chief was also going to assess the cost of equipment and transportation. And the chief and town manager were going to work through how much enforcement is wanted on the quality of life issues that are frequently addressed on the beach. And last but not least was defining what is required so that non-police officers can enforce rules and regulations and ordinances on the beach and issue civil citations for violation of same. So with that, I guess I'll go to either the chief or town manager to discuss what they have found out on those topics that we just mentioned.
Okay, well, Hello. I have some financial background information and personnel-related information, determining the first item there about determining the current start and end dates of the Rangers. Normally, they start the week before Memorial Day and end the weekend of Labor Day. What that will be this year remains to be seen with the way that schools are, but normally that's the way our program is set up. And I've included a handout straight from the budget that I direct your attention to in the bottom last 4 lines, the beach ranger salaries. That total program is right at $42,000, and that's for not only the personnel costs, but also the equipment and maintenance, gas, oil and tires, that kind of thing. But just looking at the beach ranger salaries, it's right at $32,000, and what that amounts to is we have 5 or 6 part-time temporary hires. We pay them about $12.50 an hour on the average. We pay them about $12.50 an hour on the average. That comes up to be right at a programmed of 2,560 hours, which comes out to be about 22 hours a day. That program was scoped at having 2 shifts of 2 people, and normally the shifts run from 10 to 3 and then 3 to 7. So that's how we got to that budget. With the part-time temp hires, that workforce fluctuates depending on who's available and, you know, their second, third job kind of thing. We've had 5 and 6 employees throughout the summer, but that number goes up and down. Right now, I think that we've only got 1 or 2, like for this weekend, that are available because they've either gone back to school, got a a full-time job, that kind of thing. So that's the synopsis of the Ranger program personnel-wise. We had contacted other managers, and I've included their feedback to us. And it's all over the place in terms of, Wrightsville Beach has a full-time program that they run out of their fire department, complete with lifeguards, all the way to, something that's a little bit less informal. So we can go through that, but it's all over the place, suffice it to say. Many of those beach communities, they have a different, as many beach communities in North Carolina do, if you have a full-time fire department, it's an ancillary function of a life-saving function, or they run that program through the fire department. That's not our circumstance here. And we can talk about that in length if you desire. How much enforcement, and I'm skipping over because Chief Dixon's called that in a couple of these things, but Chief Dixon and I will work through how much enforcement is wanted on quality of life issues. I've included this little spreadsheet here on potential issues. This is just a snapshot of what we have seen in the past as far as issues on the beach, and I've listed them in the column titled Regulated Issue. There's probably more, but these are the ones that we have heard from in the past. And the second column there is just a anecdotal notation on how much we see in terms of complaints, what type of feedback we get. So they are in no order of magnitude or importance. It's just a stream of consciousness listing of the things that we see. Alcohol and glass containers, unattended holes on the beach, unattended beach equipment. That's the cabana ordinance there. Operating jet skis or boats in the surf zones, surfing near the pier, pets on the strand. That's the dog issue. Being in the dunes, open fires or hibachis on the beach, trash, and attire, the nudity ordinance. So for alcohol and glass, and I've annotated whether or not we get, pretty much the only one that we get repetitive complaints from different sources, not the same person or not the same entity making the same complaint, are dogs on the strand. Now that's an anecdotal observation. It is not backed up with hard data because we don't log it, and most of the time it doesn't rise to the level that we have to have some type of formal intervention on it. But so that's the manager's take on the type of issues after talking with Jeremy on the enforcement side of the issues.
All I'll say is that you don't get complaints about it probably from other people on the beach, but the alcohol and the glass is frequent. People tend mostly to put it in a cozy, or if you go up to them and say, hey guys, this is technically, you're not supposed to have this, get it, and please don't bring glass back to the beach, you know, can you do, you know, don't bring glass on the beach. People usually keep it fairly contained, but it's, and other people on the beach don't complain about other people having alcohol. If it doesn't get rowdy, there's no big deal about it in other people's perception.
And I can tell you that I have failed to bring the ordinance book with us, but if you read that ordinance, that ordinance only addresses alcohol in public alleyways, streets, public parks, that kind of issue. Technically, people's property goes to the high tide mark, and there is a issue of interpretation with that. It's not something that we want to get involved in, is my advice to you. If there is an issue that the police need to intercede where alcohol is involved, Chief, I'm stealing your thunder here, there's probably enough going on otherwise that they can be gotten for other things.
And that's exactly how I was gonna follow that up. If alcohol's involved to the point that we're involved, it's usually some type of drunken disruptive. There's other issues there that we have the grounds to stand on more so than an ordinance that none of us are real clear about where the alcohol starts and stops. And, you know, it's different if they're in a public park over here at the basketball court than down on the beach strand, so.
So that's my kind of run through of the specific items for feedback to the group on those. I'll kick it over to Jeremy.
So I spoke to several chiefs through North Carolina and South Carolina, and just as the town manager said, everyone that I've talked to, every program is run different. There's no two that are the same. Don't even know where you would try to piggyback off of one to say one's better than the other. Honestly, the more I've talked to, the muddier the water gets. There have been several concerns that each one of them have brought up to me that I feel like are good points to bring up. So before I kind of even get into how they're doing it, I'll just talk to some of the major concerns. One thing is retention, and different agencies go about retention different ways. You have some that just do the starting salary for their beach patrol officers. The problem you run into there is they're part-time. You know, I'll just use this locally. Say they're part-time here at Holden Beach. They're working 2 days a week at starting salary, and the sheriff's office calls them and says, hey, we got a full-time job. So right in the middle of the season, boom, they're gone and out. And there's a lot of agencies that are running into that. So what a lot of agencies are actually doing is they're paying their beach patrol at an overtime rate, and they're actually getting officers from other agencies who aren't getting much overtime to call and say, hey, can I come work for you? But now you're doing it at an overtime rate of, you know, $25, $30 an hour, whatever we decide that, you know, that would be. That seems to help with retention and actually keeping people there. But of course, that gets into, you know, the more you pay people, the more they're going to want to come to work. But that's a big issue. A lot of agencies are going away from four-wheelers because the heat, the sun, the sand, everything, they're doing side-by-sides. And a lot of agencies, well, I say not a lot, a few that I've talked to are actually transitioning from side-by-sides into Jeep Wranglers, things like that. That's actually becoming a pretty big thing here on the East Coast. But I think they also have a lot more beach strand than we do. I honestly would not, you've seen our beach strand on 4th of July weekend, Memorial Day, Labor Day. I don't know that running a Jeep would be a good idea. We don't have, to me, we don't have the room. I mean, you're putting a lot of people in danger, and it's a lot different operating a four-wheeler or a side-by-side than it is an actual vehicle out there. So, I mean, those are some things to consider. And as far as the cost, I looked at that. I can give you some initial costs, but they vary so much in whether you want to start at a starting salary, or do you want to start at an overtime salary, or do you want to start at a lower, just part-time salary. I mean, you know, all of that ranges. The uniforms, the gear, all that stuff's gonna be pretty standard. But then, you know, your vehicles could range from $4,000 for a four-wheeler, up to some agencies are paying $20,000 for, you know, their side-by-sides or vehicles. So it's, like I said, the more I've dug into it, the muddier the water gets. And I know I haven't cleared any of it up for you, but that's kind of where I'm at. I'd actually feel better if you want questions and I can try to say, hey, this is where I found out on that, or I can just keep rambling about how muddy the water is.
How about the civil citation issuing authority? I know that I talked to Tim yesterday, and by the way, I've asked Tim and Chrissy to sit in too. If they can interject, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, and there are some agencies, like Ocean Isle is actually using some retired non-sworn officers, and they're sworn as code enforcement, and they're able to issue citations like that through code enforcement. Now, I haven't done detailed research to see what the swearing in process is and all that, but I know it's much less than what we actually have to do with a background investigation and medical screenings, psychological screenings, and all that stuff to do the actual law enforcement side of it. But that there is the option to do that on the non-sworn code enforcement side as well.
When you talked to various people, did they give specifics of what they have the police officers on the Strand actually looking for? Like, did they have a list of, here's what they are looking for?
So 99% of them actually have almost an identical list that we have here. There's one place, Sullivan's Island, I believe it was, down in South Carolina. The only difference I saw in theirs is they actually have a smoking ordinance. You're not allowed to smoke on the Strand, which was actually one that they deal with a lot, according to them. But pretty much everything else, dogs on the Strand is pretty much universal. It's basically everyone's major complaint. Second, I would say, would actually be tents and cabanas. And then they just kind of dwindle down from there. You get a few alcohol complaints, kind of like what we were talking about. I won't say that everyone turns a blind eye. It's mostly if you're on the beach, you're sitting in your chair, you're minding your business, and if you're not causing a disturbance, none of the agencies or officers are pushing that issue. It's when people start to cause a disturbance that, and if it gets to that point, again, that's where you don't want your non-sworn people involved. You want your sworn officers there that can handle that situation, because then you're going to get into your drunken disruptive, your other stuff that's covered under state law rather than ordinance. But for the most part, to answer that question, dogs on the Strand is the biggest one. The tents or cabanas, and different ones have different rules on. I know ours is you can't leave it up overnight. There are some islands that you can't have them up. Certain ones, you can only basically have the baby tents to protect a child. So that's one they deal with a lot.
I'd like to comment on the cabana ordinance. That we dealt with that for about 2 to 3 seasons, 6 or 7 years ago. It was a continual cabanas left overnight. It was also before we had our Central Reach project done. And the way we dealt with it was enforcement. We, passed the ordinance, and then we made a sweep, and it was pretty painful for a week or two until the word got out. Now that the Central Reach project has happened, there's more beach to put cabanas out there, and the motivation to stake your claim to a stretch of beach isn't there anymore. The supply has increased, and therefore it's driven down the demand. Plus, there is a market effect that has happened where there are entities that actually, there's professional cabana putter-uppers, and they take them down, they put them up, they take them down. So I'm sure that cabanas get left out overnight. It is not risen to a level that we have received complaints on it since then. One or two, get pointed out to us that have left in a season. But since we put the Central Reach project down, plus our ordinance, it's my opinion that that's kind of gone away because you got more beach out there, and it's not, I got to go stake my place out for my cabana.
Okay. I guess I have a few, a few questions. And I guess the first thing I would say is it seems that without us discussing it, we've decided that the way we're going to utilize the seasonal police is on the Strand, and that wasn't my understanding. My understanding was to determine how we would use them. Could we use them on patrol to supplement the people to give backup to the minimal police presence that we do have? So Chief, have you given that thought? Is there a way that we can accomplish that that's both efficient and economical? Or is that something we'll have to take, look at the next meeting or
That
so?
would, honestly, the research that I've done, I've kind of, just like you said, I've kind of focused it all on the beach strand. So to answer that, it would be an uneducated answer to give you that today. But I would definitely be interested in looking at that option to move forward.
I mean, a lot of it, I think, has to do with just your perception of where we need some support.
Right.
And how we can accomplish it. Like I said, do we have the vehicles to do? I mean, if we hire seasonal police officers, once we suit them up, they can do anything, right?
That's correct.
They can be on patrol, or they can be on the Strand, they can issue summonses, they can arrest people. So what would be the best utilization if we were to hire people? And personally, I think it's in a full-time capacity of patrol, and we can send people onto the beach to do things at other times. But that's something for you to look into. I guess, to get back to...
Mike, would you clarify that when you say to hire them as a full-time capacity on patrol and like a normal police officer? When you say patrol, you're not inferring that their patrol is limited to the Strand. They're
They're the same as your full-time police
Okay,
officer.
gotcha.
They're just hired for seasonal work, seasonal time frame, but they have all the authority and they do the same job as your full-time police officer. I mean, that was my perception of what we were kind of looking at, and then we were going to determine whether that was feasible or whether we wanted to have people who would enforce the rules on the Strand, whichever way is going to support the best quality of life for the people who live on the island, right? If it's merely enforcement of beach Strand, then maybe we don't need police officers. We can use rangers, or we can use people who have, the ability to issue a summons.
Well, I'm guilty of missing that point, and because I had asked the question at one point in time whether or not that's where we were going, because I think that I said, have we gone ahead and have we made the decision that we're looking at hiring police officers to be out there? Maybe I missed that because I thought that we were baselining what the program requires and what it might be. So I missed that.
Yeah, my interpretation was we wanted to examine police officers on the Strand, but also other ways that part-time officers could be used to help us where we need extra summer help on anywhere on the island. So it was a combination of, will police officers help out on the Strand? What
Okay.
do other people do with police officers on the Strand? But in addition, part-time help for the problems we have, particularly on busy days. And we all know parking and moving vehicle violations are a main issue, but, so it was a kind of an all-encompassing.
Okay,
Well,
because
let me
that's a little bit beyond more than just the beach
Let me just
Strand.
clarify.
Okay.
My idea of looking at seasonal police officers was something to do instead of hiring 3 police officers. So to me, the idea is I want to supplement the police department in a way that they can enforce the rules and protect the people and be protected themselves. So the argument was we didn't have enough people on patrol. And the suggestion was, or recommendation or request was to hire 3 police officers at a cost of roughly $100,000 a police officer. My idea was many communities hire seasonal police officers because, and I don't think the chief will dispute this, the calls for service don't justify having extra police officers during the off-season. Just doesn't happen. You get 2 or 3 calls a shift, max. So that doesn't, right? So what we need is coverage during a certain period of time. So from the beginning, my idea was, let's look at the issue and determine how best to address that issue. To me, it's not simply the Strand. The Strand is an issue because we're not enforcing the rules with police. We have somebody who's acting as an ambassador and helping people and doing nice things, but we don't have anybody who's really going to make somebody do what they're supposed to do, right? That's the issue. We've identified problems with the dogs, but we hear that, people kind of ignore the rangers. I don't know if that's accurate, inaccurate, but that's the perception. So the idea is, do we need somebody on the Strand, or are we content with what we have? Or if we do need more police presence, how do we get that? And my thought was seasonal police officers. So it's never, my thought was never to just look at what the Strand is to look at the whole job that's done, what's required, and how we can best address to do that more economically and more efficiently. So if a seasonal police officer can help rather than hiring a full-time police officer, then that's the way we go. If we require a full-time police officer and it doesn't make sense economically to hire a seasonal police officer, then that's the way we go. And that's why we're doing this. So at the end of the day, we can actually compare apples to apples because we'll know what we want these people to do. We'll know if they're capable of doing it, and we'll know how much, or have a good idea how much it's going to cost us to have them do it.
Well, that said, I don't feel so bad and feel like that I've missed the boat with doing an evaluation on what type of issues are on the Strand, because the type of issues that are on the Strand they probably pale in comparison to the importance of traffic and parking. That's the piece that we haven't teased out.
No, that's definitely a necessary component for us to analyze. And as I said, at the end of the day, my thought was we'll come up with a plan that that says, it's a good idea to have seasonal police officers for these reasons, or it's not such a good idea to have them for these reasons. It's simple, but I don't want to pigeonhole that we're just looking at the Strand, because that's not really the issue here.
Yeah, and I will say I was misguided as well, because I took it from the approach of only looking at the Strand.
Okay.
So I can definitely redirect the overview of this. I will say though, just in talking to any of the other chiefs, it would probably be a pilot program for something like that, or I'm not asking the right questions, because none of them that I've talked to have mentioned double dutying. It's either beach patrol or it's patrol. So, it's just, but I see what you're saying, and there are some agencies, or I feel like there are some out there somewhere, that have to do like a summertime, because the population increases so much during the summer. Do you hire extra summer help, the seasonal officers? So I will definitely focus the questions in that direction. So.
I hate to do where I come from, but
Yeah.
back in the Northeast, all kinds of beach towns hire that because, as you say, we go from 650 people to 12,000 people.
Right.
And they do the same thing, they have the trap. So you just hire people. And to me, again, maybe some of the chiefs you talk to, they may hire a lot of seasonal employees, so they just say, okay, these 4 guys are gonna take it, that's their post for the summer.
That's right.
Like a
The Strand is-
zone.
Yeah, the Strand is gonna be their post for the summer, but these other 4 guys, they're gonna be on patrol for the summer.
That's right.
We may not do that. We
That's
may, you know, to me, it's
Yeah.
not a big, you know.
It makes sense. I mean, I see where you're coming from. It's just not where I had focused my direction, so.
But I would appreciate, you know, if we could look at that. And again, from your standpoint, how do we have, you know, how much coverage do we have on patrol?
Right.
How much coverage do we need on patrol? What will it take to enforce the parking regulations and the beach strand? And how will we do it? If we, you know, whether we have 2 new police officers, are we gonna start sending a police officer onto the Strand now that we have 2 new police officers? Are we gonna do that, or are we still gonna keep just patrol and leave the Strand to the current rangers? You know, so these are all questions I think have to be analyzed so we can determine, again, the most efficient and economical way to accomplish the goal, which is to have a nice beach that people wanna come to. And people who live here, you know, are comfortable in being here and having, you know, the influx of people act in a way that you would expect people to act.
I mean, really, again, the things we hear time and again, complaints. Dogs on the beach, yes. Golf carts not following rules.
We miss out.
Yeah, golf carts not following rules, parking violations, and a lot of them have to do with golf carts parking all over the place near accesses because they don't think, and then speeding. You know, those are the ones that you hear people challenging time and again, and when are you guys gonna do something about? So, you know, it's kind of a blend of how can the department address all of these better? Be it, as Mike says, is it just full-time, or can we do a better, more efficient job at a similar cost if we have part-time? But those are the 4 things that you hear all the time from people that live on the island. Those are their 4 complaints. One of them's about the Strand. The other 3 are about our road system and traffic and violations.
One of the items for follow-up was in Jeremy's wheelhouse to see if there was a couple of chiefs that were willing to do phone conferences with the committee. I believe he's made contact with a couple, but we thought that we would belay that until we had kind of got our data presented and sculled over a bit before, you know, we went on a live mic with another chief, so we understand our line of questioning a bit before we did that. So, who is it that's offered up to talk to us?
Chief Reese from not Atlantic Beach, Emerald Isle. Chief Reese was going to, and Chief Bellamy from Ocean Isle, both would be available.
And I skimmed the information that you gave us. It seems that Emerald Isle, if I remember, just from the quick look at it, they have a fire department. They do a different.
No, they actually,
They
Emerald
have
Isle
a
has,
whole beach strand.
they've got a very large,
patrol and
they've got a very large program.
Yeah.
They're running 5 to 6 officers a day. They're one of the programs that are transitioning over to Jeep Wranglers. Their program is very large. They have 16 officers that
Yeah.
just in that program alone.
So,
And their layout of the beach is different. They've actually got a lane demarked on the Strand for,
which led to a lawsuit.
right.
Yeah. But I appreciate that, but I guess we would really be better off speaking to the Ocean Isle chief, right?
Something a
Because
lot
he's more
smaller and similar.
similar to
That's-
what we have,
and that's
and his
fine.
program would be closer, I think, to what we're kind of thinking about. We're not hiring a new police department.
Right,
It's
that's right.
5 guys to go on the Strand and new Wranglers. And speaking of that, when we talk about the funds and the idea that if you hire someone and you don't pay them a decent salary, they're liable to, with good cause, once they get a good job offer, they're gone. And that's, I think we have to understand that. But, so I would ask you, I think last time when we were talking about, in generalities, what it would cost, you said something about $17, $18 an hour to hire someone?
I'm just basing that off of the starting salary for, I forgot about that. The starting salary based on the new salary study that was done,
Right.
it's 17 and a quarter or something like that is the starting law enforcement salary.
So I would suggest, I mean, we can't pay seasonal employees more than we pay our own employees.
Right.
You just can't do it.
Right.
You know, because you talk about guys wanting to leave or guys be bitter, that can't happen. So I would think that the salary that we're talking about is that base starting salary to offer these people. So, and I guess I would also think that a police officer on the Strand is equal to 2 ambassadors on the Strand, that you don't need another guy riding with you on the Strand, right, to enforce.
I would agree with that. You don't need two in the same vehicle or
Right.
the same
Right.
four-wheeler or whatever.
Yeah.
I think the purpose of the two is, and I don't know, I haven't gotten this, I'm shooting from the hip here. I think a lot of it is the visibility. And if you've got one officer and he's on the east end,
No,
it's
I
a
understand.
long time
Yeah.
before he makes another visibility.
No,
So-
I got it, but I'm just saying, and I understand, if I'm a 19-year-old college student, I'd like to have another 19-year-old college student with me if I'm gonna tell a guy like me, fill the hole in, right?
Right.
I get it.
Yeah.
But I'm saying a sworn police officer, that shouldn't be a problem.
Right.
So to get this, here's what I'm trying to get at here. I would like you to do a computation for me that based on the exact $42,000 expense we have here, and assuming that anybody on the Strand is going to use the same equipment that we have to go up and down the Strand, how much it would cost to do it with the seasonal police officer rather than, because we won't have to have, put my glasses back on, we don't need to have as many shifts because you're gonna have one person instead of 2 people. Although I have to be honest, I'm on the beach a lot, and it's quite often that it is one person in the beach ranger cart, so.
And that's where we've modified our procedure this year, and it's strictly due to COVID. Tim,
Well, no, we've never had more than one person in the car.
But we had-
Only on the busiest weekends, which was like 3 times a year, did we put 2 people to a car. It was only in the last 2 years that we started, running 2 shifts, and the reason we run 2 shifts was because of all the dog complaints, because when they would end the first shift, the dogs would come out. Specifically on the west end was where we had most of the problem with the dogs. Because it's hard to get to the west end. So what happens is when the beach rangers can't get to the west end, the residents down there start taking their dogs out there because they know you can't get around the end of the beach. And all down there, once that tide starts coming in. So we started running 2 shifts so that they could overlap. In other words, your description of starting at one end and going to the other end, one would start in the 800 block, one would start in the 400 block. They would go towards each end and then pass each other twice.
Yep.
There was a methodology into that, but for the most part, up to this year, we only had 3 beach rangers most of the time. Sometimes we would have 4, but they didn't work at the same time. They weren't on shift at the same time.
And that is the reality of how we actually engage in operations. Programmatically, we had envisioned 2 rangers in a vehicle and 2 shifts. It didn't play out that way because the personnel, it was not needed. Once we got into it and we saw it, it wasn't a logical deployment of the asset. So that programmed number at 42,000, if you actually look in the third column, you can see what we spent on manpower this year. It's less than $6,000 because of that split in the shift, and plus just some of the comings and goings of those employees.
Yeah, I've actually had people ask me if we had a ranger program this year. There have been people who periodically go to the beach, not frequently, who are used to seeing rangers zipping by frequently. So I think some of the manpower issues, we actually had some people thinking maybe we didn't do rangers this year because they didn't see them like they had in the past when they would periodically go on the beach. So, I mean, I think it's one of those things that, you know, it's difficult to
Beach is
get.
9 miles long.
I know,
you know.
But if I understand what we just said is, we did have the same coverage, we just didn't have, I mean, so we had as many trips, or we had as many hours as we had the year before,
We budgeted for it,
Yeah.
but we didn't deploy that.
because they didn't show up. But so the 22 hours a day is having a ranger on each end of the beach and 2 different shifts, so paying for 4 people.
That's right. It's 2 in a cart and overlapping shifts is what that would programmed at.
But it's 1 in 2 separate carts.
Yes.
That's where I miss.
We originally had 1 cart.
Yeah.
We then purchased two carts, and one of the reasons you're not seeing as many this year is because those things don't last that long on the beach. So we've had at least one of them down for 50% of the time, and so they have to go in for repairs and come back out because we didn't have enough money based on what we were provided to buy 4 or 5 carts.
Okay.
So
And I will say this too, I don't even know how old his are, but most of the ones that I talked to when we were talking about 4-wheelers and the Rangers and the side-by-sides, most of the agencies have figured out after 2 years, they go ahead and
Yep.
replace them, whether they need it or not, because most of them aren't even gonna make it through that 3rd year, so.
Well, that's irrespective of having police or rangers on the beach is the point.
Right.
It doesn't matter which program is monitoring the beach. That's just a fact of life of the equipment.
Yeah, that's right.
If we're gonna have a reliable presence
You're
on
gonna
the
have-
beach,
Well,
whoever it is.
And one of the things that we're looking at is just leasing them. Just leasing the vehicles.
Okay.
Yeah, and, I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, that's separate and apart from this discussion.
Chief, I just did the quick math, so you don't have to do it, because now it's clear to me. The difference between a starting police salary and a current ranger salary at the same 2,560 hours comes to $12,800.
Well, we need to use a fine pencil on that, because police officers have different benefits than part-time employees. But you're hand grenade close
But
on that.
I had this question: if we hire people for seasonal work, do they get fringe benefits? And the answer was no in the beginning, but
Generally speaking, non-law enforcement personnel do not get fringe benefits. However, I do not know that question for law enforcement personnel. We would have to find out.
okay, but we'll find that out.
Right,
I'm just
we'll
saying
find that out.
Salary-wise, it's about $13,000.
Yeah.
That's all. So. Okay.
Would we ever be in a situation where rangers can issue civil citations? That was the specific question last time, not having, part-time retired officers or something. Would there ever be a situation where you could authorize rangers to issue civil citations, or is that just not a possibility?
I think that it's an assumptive liability question. Chief, you can back me up on this, but pretty much you can bring somebody in, green as a gourd, swear them in as a code enforcement officer, And we would need to double check with the League of Municipalities, our insurance provider, but it's an assumptive liability. How comfortable does management feel with that? From the manager's chair, I'd have to walk around that one a couple times. You know, hiring a seasonal person to write, that is a non-law enforcement officer that has been screened by an external agency would cause me issues of concern. Because I don't know them, you know, I don't know them, I don't know their background, I'm not familiar with them.
That's a legitimate concern, but I think that is something that we want to consider, right? The idea is a police officer, you know, benefits, civilian benefits and detriments. So your concern, legitimate, that's on the minus side of the ledger. The ability to hire these people, and maybe they're not going to leave in the middle of the summer because the job market, you know, there's some things we just want to look at, that's all.
Absolutely.
Whether it's the right way to go or not, we don't know, but that's what we're all doing here, right? We're trying to figure out the right way to do something. Right. Do you have any other questions?
Not on this point, I just think that for the next meeting, we just need to be really clear about what is getting investigated for, I'm just going to refer to it as a blended program, online, on beach, on land,
Right.
well, beach is land, but it's,
Land and sea.
yeah, land and seaside, how's that?
Yeah.
But it's, I understand exactly what you're saying, David, about having rangers given the ability to issue citations being a real concern, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that, but it gets us back to then we basically never have citations issued for the dogs on the beach, and I think people know that. Because we can't get police officers down fast enough to actually capture it at the moment. And that's the reality of having our force in an 8-mile-long beach.
Well, and there's also the practical side of issuing a citation.
Yeah, I know.
I'm Joe Blow from
Saskatchewan,
McIntosh,
yeah.
Wisconsin, and I've got my poodle down on the beach, and I've walked down there, and Jeremy, as a police officer, rides up. Jeremy, what are you gonna do to me? You have to have some form of identification to write me a citation,
I
don't
know.
you?
Correct.
Okay, so, well, my license, I'm in my swimming trunks, my license is up at the house. You know, what are you gonna do? I'm on the west end, it's 600 feet from the water to my house, so do you want to go through that process? Walk us through that. I mean, that's some of the realities of what you gotta
Yeah.
deal with.
It is, I know. But there's also the idea that if the police are there, issue a warning one day, there is not as high a likelihood that somebody is going to do a repeat the next day.
I'm gonna offer up some perspective on warnings on the beach. I'm not a warning kind of guy. I dealt with 2 and 3 years of warnings on cabanas. We went through all kind of conniptions about seeing cabanas out there and tagging them and keeping track of who was under the cabana. If the dog is out there, write them a ticket.
Well, I do agree,
You know?
I do agree with you, but
That's my
the feeling has been, in a lot of people's eyes, that if there's a knowledge that you can get a citation, that if you catch somebody early in the week, a new vacationer, and I can tell you now, down by us, down on the west end, our walkways do not have a sign about, you know, the violation for dogs and everything. These are private walkways. We have vacationers come who they don't realize that dogs are not supposed to be on the strand during these hours. You tell them the first time, a lot of them then say, thank you, didn't realize it. Some of them know the rule and just don't care. Those are the ones that you want to issue the citations to, not the poor guy who on Sunday comes out for the first time and, oh, it's not on the walkway, I missed this, you know, I'm taking him back right now, I won't bring him back again outside the hours. Again, it's this information thing. Not all walkways are created equal, because not all walkways are managed by the town. And so if the information isn't there at the walkway, it's very easy for a vacationer to just be oblivious to the fact there are limited hours.
I'd like to speak to, as someone who's been doing code enforcement for 25 years, the biggest mistake this town can make would be giving unqualified, untrained, unvetted management of that beach strand to novice code enforcement officers without police training. I think that you can, the law allows you to have a non-law enforcement officer enforce your ordinances and issue civil citations. The law does allow for that. But it would be my recommendation that that would be one of the probably the biggest mistakes this town could ever make, because the demeanor and the authority by which it takes to issue that type of civil citation out on the public is going to be betrayed badly, whereas if it was coming from a badged, licensed law enforcement officer operating from a different authority, it would be a better scenario. But I would not put part-time people out there. I don't even know if I would put a part-time police officer out there. You know what I mean? I guess you could if they're well trained. But issuing civil citations is different than criminal. Criminals, you know, act in certain ways, but the regular citizen who thinks that enforcing a dog rule is petty and, you know, is not a real problem, can be a handful in more ways than one, and here's why. An unqualified, untrained code enforcement officer who enforces the letter of the ordinance, you know what I mean, can be portrayed in numerous ways that they're not used to, and they'll be ignored just about as much as someone who's just a beach ranger, who's out there doing PR work. I would warn against using normal people, you know what I mean, and vetting them as code enforcement officers and putting them out there to enforce, to issue civil citations. And the other thing is that most civil citations, based in your ordinance, unless the remedy is specific, you have to give them an opportunity to remedy it. So you put a police officer out there and tell them you're gonna give somebody a ticket if they dig a hole, you're gonna have to change your ordinance, because they should be allowed to remedy the situation by filling the hole. So unless the ordinances are specific, and I'm not sure if they are or not, but I know some of ours aren't. The other thing is that your ordinances, if you do choose to go the route of no rangers and code enforcement in general or police, you're gonna have to take a look at the ordinance book, because the ordinance book is specific about who is enforcing certain ordinances. It's like the building official or his designee, or the police chief or his designee. So when you put someone out there, you gotta be careful, because you gotta follow the rules of the law if it ends up in court. And you've got someone who's operating as code enforcement officer, but the ordinance says that he's supposed to be operating under me, but he's operating under Jeremy. So there's some things to think outside that box that I guess you can get to later. But as far as someone who's been doing code enforcement for 25 years, if I was gonna issue civil citations on a regular basis, the ones that we issue are pretty straightforward, and the statutes pretty clearly state what we have to do. Civil citations can't be but so much. They have to be no more than 500, and I think they can be 50.
I think the dog is 50, I think it's 50, yeah, which is,
So I would just be real careful about considering beach rangers as code enforcement.
I agree with
Yeah.
you. It was a question we wanted answered, and it's
Yeah.
been pretty
That was a
clearly
problem that
answered.
that was a problem that was discussed, and we, you know, man,
Do the beach rangers have a way to communicate with the police department?
they have,
No?
Cell phone,
They have, okay.
yes.
Okay.
And somebody live picks up?
If they call the officer's cell phone, and that's what I was gonna say, because at the beginning of the summer, we had an officer who was on light duty, who was in the office all the time. That option is not available right now, so we do not have a person in there to answer the phone constantly.
And one of the reasons that they can't use the radio comm, the police radio comm, is that's a restricted law enforcement function.
I just want to make sure, so when the Rangers go out, they have the current officer's cell phone number.
Should. We have a list of our office of the beach rangers, and I don't have their exact schedule, but we have a list of the numbers, so I'm assuming, and I don't wanna say
We provide
wrong.
a list of everybody, that you're on the bottom of the list somewhere. Everybody, they have a list of everybody's phone numbers, and they know who they're supposed to call. We have a training session, usually it's earlier than Memorial Day for any new ones, and the old ones usually help with the training. I've not had any of them tell me that they called a police officer and didn't show up.
Okay. So we need to recap what we're going to try to do between now and the next meeting, right? And I guess what I recall is, do you feel comfortable after this meeting to actually have the conference call with the chief from Ocean Isle?
Yeah, I do, if you tell me now that we're changing focus a
Yeah,
little
I-
bit, and knowing that his program isn't run like that, and that's fine, you can still ask him all the questions that you want. I would like to give him some type of forewarning to say,
Sure.
this is the direction the conversation is gonna go, so he'll kinda know.
I'm actually thinking that I'm less comfortable having that conference call yet until we get a bit more organized on the things that we are saying the part-time officers would do. So it's beach, strand, plus so that maybe after the next meeting where we get a more organized picture of how you would use part-time officers to do the top tasks that we discussed: dogs, golf cart safety, parking, and speeding, and what your perception would be how that could work, and then have a talk with others.
Fine.
Just because we're sort of only halfway there now.
Fine. So we won't do that next meeting.
Yeah, it's just,
Okay. So what we will do is, we'll have the chief and the town manager check on the fringe benefit question, and so we can have a side-by-side comparison to the cost of having beach rangers patrol the Strand as opposed to having seasonal police officers patrol the Strand. That-
I have one question that none of us have really talked about, which is sort of I'll just call it the budget number. So are we really, what we're approaching is, what could we do without beach rangers, as well as less than the cost of an additional office? Are we trying to, what could we do if we put beach ranger money to part-time police, plus we're trying to save on officers? So would it be fair to say, what kind of presence could you have, program could you have, how many people, how many hours, if you were given beach ranger budget plus maximum one officer budget? I'm trying to kind of get a number there.
Well, that's an easy calculation.
that-
That's an easy calculation. I mean, there's a couple of variables in there.
It's
But
just-
the beach ranger number today is 42 grand.
Right, yeah.
You know, a cop is X.
That's why do we want to have a sort of a number to target?
I would say that that's kind of backing into it, where I would rather go at it from, this is, after we analyze everything, this is how many we either want or how many we don't want, and figure out what that cost is, and see if that is more than the cost would be for the current program and the, budgeted officer, right? You're gonna get to
I'm
the same.
comfortable either way. We
Yeah,
can,
Yeah, you're gonna get to
either
the same
abide at the
thing.
time, or,
But I just like to look at it from this way, rather than having a preconceived notion that if I take this much money, if I take X money, then I can hire 4 people, if maybe I don't need 4 people, maybe you can always use more, I know, but maybe we can get by with 3, rather than backing ourselves into going for 4 or 5 if we, I mean,
well, we can nip this.
yeah, you can
off
do
a
it either
piece at
way.
a time.
It
I mean,
doesn't, it doesn't make,
I
it doesn't
understand
make.
both of you.
Yeah.
Going back to Pat, what you said prior to that last statement about, examining things that a seasonal officer might do and ways they might be utilizing, you listed like 4 things. Jeremy, as you're looking at that, I would just remind and ask that we might want to also consider special events in that list, because concerts, when we have 15 to 17 each week and an influx of people coming in, typically what we've seen is, while the police department does a great job of coming and doing what they can, they get called out on calls, and that leaves anywhere between 400 and 1,000 people up underneath the bridge with no patrol, public safety at hand.
I can testify to the fact that feedback from various people, Chrissy's probably also got this too, when a police officer just walks through the crowd at a concert, it seems like that it's appreciated. It's showing the flag kind of thing.
Right, yeah.
And
Yeah, I was just focusing on complaints. I wasn't focusing on other things, but thank you, that's,
as a matter of fact, we've had requests for that to occur, during a concert, midway through the concert, can we have a police officer just to walk through?
Or it's come back as feedback to me of this, where did they go? And then I have to explain that they can't be there the whole time based on current capacity.
mhm. Okay.
We talked, we talked about a lot of issues that need to be tightened up a little bit. And to be perfectly honest with you, I can't remember what they all are. But, for you, again, it's transportation, right? Not only the transportation of what will we do with the beach strand, will we lease equipment, will we buy new equipment? But if we're gonna use seasonal officers for patrol, how will they get around?
Right.
And what will it cost us for them to get around? And again, it may be reasonable and it may be unreasonable. It might, that could be a deal breaker, or it could be something we can do. So, I mean, my hope for this is that we'll raise all those issues like Tim just raised about, hey, you may not want to put on a civilian and just give them the authority to do it, because it does take a little bit of tact and a bit of a thick skin to let somebody vent when you're giving them a ticket.
Well, and I'd follow up on the number of issues there, because it came up about what's required to issue a civil citation and reviewing of the criminal versus in 1099. I'd suggest that we read 1099, the difference between the two of them, because there's a specific sub-paragraph that says civil citations for building stuff are issued by the building inspector. All other civil citations may be issued by any police officer or the town manager. So I think that language would
David,
need
you
to
have
be,
something to do now on,
would be
in
doctored.
addition, you can
Well,
go up and down the
but
beach.
it prefaces
There's only a handful that David's got. They tell you
Yeah,
that
yeah,
never-
each one is specific, but it prefaces there is a process of notification and that kind of thing, but that we need to,
Yeah, if you're
get
just
more
gonna hand
familiar
out
with that.
civil citations, you got to change some of that book, sort of.
yeah, that's,
It allows for remedies against the public.
That's another issue that we have to address, right?
that's right, yes, sir.
And another,
Nuance.
yeah, something you have to weigh before you decide which way you're gonna go. Perfect. But, I don't, do you recall any other issues, specific issues that we're supposed to, that we discussed that we want to tighten up for next
What
meeting?
did we decide about talking to benchmarking other communities with a telephone? Do we want to try to schedule that, or we want to
Wanna
get a little
have
smarter on this
One
stuff?
more meeting to,
Okay.
have this meeting to get everything clarified
Maybe we-
beyond just the beach before
Okay.
we have.
Yeah, this way maybe we can ask more specific questions. Hey, did you consider this? And if you did, what were the pluses and the minuses to it? And why did you or didn't you do, I agree. Look, we can, tighten it up a little bit so that we ask specific questions to the person who's going to give us his time rather than just,
Since we expanded, parking, golf carts, speeding, that kind of thing, is there any specific data that we can bring back, in anticipation of that conversation evolving that y'all can think of, or that we would, what you thinking about that?
I think on the golf carts, and again, knowing that our staff is stretched, how many complaints are you getting about golf carts, illegal parking and underage driving, golf carts that don't have license, all of the golf carts that people feel are not legal. And there's been a number of cases where people have said they're having real problems when the golf carts are driving at night because even if they have lights, they seem to be relatively hard to see. So how many moving and parking violation complaints have you been getting on golf carts specifically? Because I think that's a big wish of people, that the golf carts are perhaps a bit more controlled. And just this year, parking and speeding violations, what sort of frequency are you dealing with them?
One of those should be a fairly easy request. The complaints is probably, I'll have to pull it up in the computer and see what it looks like. But basically, when we issue a citation, because a golf cart, just like we always preach, it's a motor vehicle. It's got to have tags, it's got to have the whole 9 yards. So there's not really any designation to separate a golf cart complaint from a Honda Accord complaint. So some of that may actually be a little difficult to come up with any accurate numbers for, but I'll look and see what we can come up with, so. But
I mean, I know we have people who call in and complain about golf cart parking at certain walkways. How that gets captured, I don't know.
And that may be an easier thing to say, hey, when I go pull it up, we're getting a lot of complaints in the just 900 blocks.
That's exactly where the
Exactly.
most complaints,
And
I
that-
think, are being
And
targeted.
I will tell you, there has been a lot of orange tickets written down there to orange golf carts, so. But nonetheless, that's just one area that I know about. But I'll go pull the numbers and see if I can come up with some accurate stuff. But as far as differentiating between that Honda Accord or a golf cart, it may be a little difficult, so, but I'll see what I can find out for you.
I would like to add something that may be worth thinking about when it comes to the vehicles on the Strand. Our beach rangers don't have to go on and off the Strand, and if you do go the way of the police officers, I would recommend probably a better vehicle of some type that can move for emergencies to get on and off the beach. In other words, if they're gonna, if something happens and they need to assist the officer, you're gonna be a long time assisting him with a UTV from the west end of the beach, you know what I mean? Because
That's 25 miles top end.
yeah, and, I know we've looked at it. The west end is a problem when it comes to enforcement because of how far it is to the beach access there, our access, the town's access to get on and off the beach. It's an 800 block.
Mhm.
So, but I would what if you have to bring somebody off the beach? Because you're issuing civil citations and might even be criminal, you might, because beach rangers see a criminal activity, if they don't recognize it as criminal, they can't arrest nobody, can't bring them off the beach, and neither is a police officer, I don't think, with UTV. You think that? Yeah. So that might just be something to think about, I'm just saying that, I don't know that police officers can utilize UTVs,
Well,
yeah.
I would say this, right? If we had a police officer on the beach, he would be supplementing the officer on patrol. The officer on patrol has a $60,000 truck that we hope can go on the beach and do what has to be done, right? So that's not really an issue for me. Anybody, if he has to make an arrest, he calls for backup, the person on patrol comes with the truck. I think that accomplishes the goal.
Well, my only concern was a lost child. That was my concern with the beach rangers, was that there'd be an emergency on one end of the beach, and the beach rangers wouldn't be able to get to it. But I guess if, if you're looking at it from a standpoint that it's off the beach, but before I spoke, I did think about that. What if the officer that's backing him up needs help? He's on the beach with a UTV. Not the officer on the beach was what I was thinking about. I was thinking about the other officer that's backing him up. What if he needs assistance? He's got a $60,000 truck, the other guy's got a UTV, not the other way around. Because most likely, he's the one doing the real patrol, where he's gonna run into something. That's what I was thinking.
Oh, you're doing the flip. You're saying
I'm doing
the
the
guy on
flip, yeah.
patrol is looking for backup for the guy on the ATV,
Yeah,
which they don't have, which they don't have now.
yeah. Now, my only thought was, anywhere else it's gonna be quick, where's being it ain't.
No.
Yeah, that was my thought. That's,
Okay.
not that it's important, but I thought I'd throw it out there.
More things to discuss.
Rock Sword's got some good stuff.
Okay. Anything else? Move to recess this meeting?
Yes, sir.
Okay, recess. Thank you.